Hey, what's up? In this video, I'm going to share what a day in the life of an actual DevOps engineer looks like. Now, every week, dozens of people apply for my mentorship, but when I talk to them, many of them actually have no idea what DevOps engineers actually do. So in this video, I'm going to share what a day in the life looks like based on the jobs that I've had myself. Now, when I say day in the life of DevOps engineer, that is already a little bit murky because the title of DevOps engineer is wildly different from country to country and from organization to organization. So when I say DevOps engineer, take that with a grain of salt, because actually what you will see is that my first job was more like a Linux sysadmin. My second job was more like an enterprise cloud operations engineer. And my third job was more like a platform engineer. And these are just some of the jobs I've had, not all of them. But from every job, my official title was DevOps engineer, but the actual interpretation of that varied from job to job. So rather than focusing on the title, I'm just going to focus on what I actually did. So let's jump in. But before we jump in, my team shared something with me that I want to share with you as well, which is that 78% of you guys who are watching my channel are not subscribed yet. And we can see that there are plenty of people who watch my videos every single week who have not subscribed. So if you are watching my videos, I just want to ask you, please click the subscribe button down below. It is a completely free way to support this channel. And as you can see, we are very close to reaching a very important milestone for our channel. I never thought that we could make it, but when I started out making these niche DevOps videos about Vim almost 5 years ago now, but we're getting really close. So if you ever got any value out of my videos over these years, please just take the time and click. It takes 1 second. Click the subscribe button down below. It truly helps me. It really supports the channel. It helps us grow and reach more people like you who get value out of my videos. Thank you so much. Thank you for being on the journey with me. And now let's jump in. Now, across these 3 jobs that I'm going to share with you, there were a few things that were the same with every job. The first thing there is that you usually log in the morning, almost always from home, and you have what's called a stand-up. This is a short meeting, maybe 15, sometimes 30 minutes, where everyone logs in and then they'll share what they did yesterday, what they're going to be doing today, and whether they have any blockers. This is something that I've had in every single job that I've worked so far. And then depending on the company, there's usually a few recurring meetings that you have every week or every other week. Most companies are using the agile methodology also for DevOps teams. So you will have things like backlog refinement, sprint planning, and these kinds of typical agile meetings. And then the second thing that was the same across all of these jobs is that the day or the week or the month even is usually split between 2 types of work. The first type being reactive, so you're responding to incidents or responding to support tickets and things like that. And the second thing being proactive work, where you are actively building new systems, you are making changes, you are implementing things, performing maintenance, that kind of thing. So it's proactive and reactive work. And many of these jobs that I've had, actually every day consisted of these 2 types of work. So it's actually quite a varied work day that you usually have as a DevOps engineer. So there is this balance between firefighting and focused work where you are just alone and working on some cool project. Now, of course, this is going to be different from everyone. There are also going to be people writing angry comments in right now. That's not what DevOps is. But this has just been my own experience in my own DevOps journey, and that is what I'm sharing here. So those were the common patterns that I've seen across these jobs. So let's just jump into the first job that I've had, which is my first junior DevOps job, which was at the Gemeente Amsterdam, the City of Amsterdam. And this is a very large government organization where I joined a DevOps team. Now, this team, this area was almost like a startup within this huge government organization. So there was a lot of freedom in that sense. We weren't restricted by the usual IT regulations that the others had, because we were not running extremely important applications in that sense. These were all data-driven applications. One example was, for example, that there was an application that every morning would analyze the traffic in the city and the planned ship traffic based on the bridges and all of the current traffic. It would calculate the most optimal garbage collection routes for the garbage trucks. Now, these operations, like the garbage collection, would not stop if they didn't have the optimal route, but it was still a pretty important thing. So that's why we didn't have as strict of a regulation as other teams we had in the company, which meant that we could also take bigger risks, which was interesting. I was part of a DevOps team which supported about 20 developer teams. And going from this proactive and reactive, like the reactive work was something that we call the support shift. Now, this was organized in such a way where we had a Slack channel, and all of these developer teams were in that Slack channel. And then whenever a team needed support or help with that, they would post a message in the Slack channel. And then your task was you mark these messages, we call them tickets. You mark the message as with ticket, with the eye emoji, that someone was looking at it. And then it was your job to fix it. Now, this environment wasn't really mature, and it was a very duct tape kind of environment. Lots of Linux servers, lots of Ansible, a great place to learn for troubleshooting as a junior. So every ticket was basically a little quest through an undocumented system that had been built over the years, which was really unstable. And it was a great way for me to learn troubleshooting, because every ticket would involve me SSH-ing into a server, figuring out what was wrong, and there was always random stuff breaking or random things that these people needed help with. So it was very reactive, and every day was completely different. Now, the second part would be the project shift, right? The proactive work. And this is where, like a software team, we would have a backlog of improvements and projects to work on. And then in the beginning of the sprint, you would be assigned, or you would pick a couple of these projects, and that is what you would work on when you did not have those reactive days. So in this team, we would split it a week. So you would have a week of support work, and then the rest of the sprint, you had another week to focus on your proactive work. That's how we did it. So at this stage, I was, of course, a junior engineer, so I was not able to pick up like huge projects, but there were some very interesting projects that I got to do there. One of the main projects I did was to migrate a 4 terabyte Postgres database to a new server and upgrade Postgres 2 major versions. Now, that does not sound like a junior job to do, which it isn't. The fact was that in this team where I was at, like, people were coming and going quite a lot, right? There was lots of freelancers. And when I was there, there wasn't anyone with any deep Postgres knowledge. And because I was an underpaid junior, they were happy to assign me that task because someone had to do it and someone had to figure it out. So I was able to go deep into Postgres and really figure out how everything was set up, all of the Ansible playbooks, and how Postgres worked, essentially. So I had to figure out how to upgrade those major versions. I had to do that in a test environment. I had to orchestrate a migration of a 4 terabyte database, which took well over 24 hours to even copy over, right? It was really interesting work, and I learned a ton from that. A second project that I did was, we were not running Kubernetes, we were running Docker containers on VMs that we managed ourselves. So we had like 10 VMs running hundreds of Docker containers, but there was no monitoring, no observability, and most importantly, no security scanning. So one of the projects I did there was I built a completely custom service written in Python that would go through these servers, take each running container that was there, and then perform a security scan on those container images. It would then generate a report from that and give us insights into what was running on those servers. And newsflash, there was a ton of CVEs and like containers 2 years old that never had been updated. So it gave us a lot of insight, but this was a lot of fun to do. It was a fun project to do because it taught me how to code. It taught me how their infrastructure worked, and it was something that I could really dig in and work on for a few weeks. That was my first real implementation of Python code, and it was a great learning experience. So that is what I want you to understand from that even if you are a junior DevOps engineer, depending on the environment that you're in, like you're not getting coffee for the seniors, right? You, as a junior engineer, if you have the skills and if you had the right mentors, then you can do these production grade implementations and tough projects like migrating and upgrading Postgres databases, even as a junior. Because when I started out, it was so hard for me to know what to focus on, which tools should I learn, how do I even land the first DevOps job, and where can I get help with this? Well, all of these questions will be answered completely for free in over 20 hours of free premium video course material that you can get completely for free by clicking the link in the description box down below. It's my gift to you. Best of luck with it. Now, my second job was a massive step up. So while I was working at Amsterdam as a junior, I encountered Kubernetes for the first time. We weren't using it then, but I discovered it during my free time. And as soon as I tried it for the first time, I fell completely in love with it. And I spent all my evenings, weekends, going deep into Kubernetes and studying it. Eventually, I got certified and I managed to land a job as a Kubernetes consultant, doubling my current salary. And one of the first assignments I had as a Kubernetes consultant was with the Dutch National Railways. Here I joined the cloud platform team, which was running on Microsoft Azure. Now, this was a completely different scale. Like, this team was managing hundreds of Azure subscriptions and well over 100 developer teams as well. It was huge. And that's the scale that we're talking about here. Because this was a large enterprise like this, with much higher stakes, the work environment was very different. Like, we're talking critical public transport infrastructure here. So there was a lot more paperwork to be done. There were much stricter rules, much more processes, and a very different environment to be in rather than this sort of mini startup within a government organization. And because it was such a huge team, there was also a huge amount of what I call grunt work. So we had to do a lot of like role assignments. So a lot of tickets that would come in, which basically involved like changing one line in the code and submitting a PR. And like there was hours of toil or like boring work that needed to be done, but the only people who could do it were the DevOps engineers, but they had access to the systems. So that is also a reality of these bigger enterprise environments, that there is also work that is not so fun to do. So many hours of the day were not very glamorous. But on the other hand, there were also some really cool projects that I could do there. All of this infrastructure was handled through Bicep templates, and I had been learning Bicep in my free time there as well. And here I got the chance of developing a completely new disaster recovery environment where I had to build out a full network environment, set up multiple firewalls in multiple regions, mirrored from our own live production environment. And I had to write all these Bicep modules and all of these pipelines completely from scratch. And that was a super cool project that I learned so much from, because the requirements were massive. And I really had to dig deep and build this from scratch with the help of the architects, and I learned a ton from that. So when I was not doing this sort of boring ticket work, I was actually building some cool stuff that would have massive implications for the company. And I was working with some very, very senior, intelligent people that I could draw a lot from. Now, the second biggest thing that happened during this job, this assignment, was when I joined, I had very little production Kubernetes experience. I had done the studies. I hadn't had the chance of getting much experience. And when I joined, we were running over 50 Azure Kubernetes clusters already. Now, the person who was responsible for managing those clusters, he was scheduled to leave. So I very assertively came in and said, I want to take this over. So there was a bit of a transition period, but I went from having zero Kubernetes experience to being Mr. Kubernetes at the Dutch National Railways. It went very quickly because I was throwing myself into work that was honestly above my pay grade, but that also forced me to learn and to grow very quickly. So when I was thrown into an incident, or when something needed to be updated or fixed, I had the knowledge and the skills, but I didn't have the experience. So I would go all in on it. And yeah, frankly, I would work deep into the night in my own time to fix these things, because this was my chance to grow. So I didn't really think about work hours. I just took it as the opportunity to get this experience. Because I didn't work my 8 hours a day, but I was working double that, I very quickly went from zero to Mr. Kubernetes in the organization. So when I took over, the first thing I noticed was that we were 2 minor versions behind, which is a big sin in the Kubernetes world, because as you know, every 6 months there is a new release, and Azure Kubernetes Service will actually stop supporting you if you are 2 minor versions behind. So you have to be very, very up to date all the time if you want to get the continuous support from Microsoft. The person who was in charge hadn't followed up with this. So the clusters were actually getting out of date. So this was the first thing that I took over. Now, to give you an indication, like, these were not toy applications that were running here. One of the applications that I managed, or the cluster rather I managed that was running the application, was an application for bike parking. So in the Netherlands, 1.1 million people travel by train every day, and the majority of these people will take their bicycle and cycle to the train station, and then there is this large automated facility where you can park your bicycle in a guarded facility. Now, to get into that facility, you take your public transport card and scan it at one of these little gates. Now, when you scanned at that gate, that signal would go to the Kubernetes cluster that I was managing. It would be processed there and sent back, and that is how the access was granted. So if that application went down, 1.1 million people would not be able to park their bikes in these facilities or get their bikes out. So in that sense, this was critical infrastructure. And I was managing the cluster that was running this application. And this is just one example, but there were all sorts of train-related public infrastructure that I was managing on these clusters. So when you then start upgrading this cluster, you better be sure that this goes well, right? So I had to go in, I had to do a lot of talking with the engineers. We had to submit a lot of paperwork in order to be allowed to do an upgrade. It was actually a lot of paperwork. So that's also the reality of an enterprise environment. But I learned so much. There were incidents at some of these upgrades. They went fine on staging and then they failed in production. And we had to do these upgrades late in the night because obviously then fewer people are using the trains. So we were required to do this late at night. And it also required, for example, one of these developers to be online so we could test the application properly. Now, I've been in situations where a production application like that did not come up after the upgrade, and there was literally no difference between staging and production. But this is when the real learning happens, right? You are sitting there, you're sweating, the application is not up and running, but the application better be up and running at 5 a.m. in the morning, because that's when people are going to be starting to park their bikes, right? And every single time we got it to work, but the quickest way to learn something is to take control of a big project like that and actually finish it. So yeah, I did successfully do it. I became Mr. Kubernetes and I learned a lot in this role. But as you can see, this role was much more higher stakes, with much more enterprise, a lot of focus on building large structures from scratch, or doing very, very challenging maintenance tasks. So this was an environment with a lot of contrast. It was many hours of quite boring admin work with paperwork or doing boring support tickets. But then the balance was that there were also some very exciting and challenging situations when something went wrong or there is an incident or something like that. So if you're enjoying these stories so far, please click the subscribe button down below if you haven't already. And now I'll share what my third job looked like, and this job was at a company called Van Oort. This is a marine company, and these are the people who built the Palm Islands in Dubai, for example. They specialize in building windmill parks in the sea, but also dredging. So taking soil from the bottom of the sea and putting it elsewhere so that the ships can go through. And this was a really interesting environment. So I joined their cloud platform team, and there was quite a difference because at the train company, yes, we were using Kubernetes, but it wasn't very mature. Some teams were using Terraform to apply their manifests or just pushing manifests to it. It was quite messy many of the times, but this stack was actually a lot more mature in terms of cloud native. So we were using Argo CD, Azure Kubernetes, proper pipelines. It was much more mature that way. But the problem was the infrastructure was mature, but the teams using it were not that mature. They were not that routine with it yet. So this gave some very interesting challenges that I'm going to talk about in a second. So the infrastructure was mature, but the challenge here wasn't really the infrastructure, it was the people. So we had built this beautiful platform with all of these workflows, but the developer teams weren't really using it as intended. And an example of this would be that many teams did not have auto sync on in their Argo CD workflows. They would push their changes to the repo, and then they would ask us, please sync the repo, because they didn't dare to do it themselves. So the adoption was lagging a lot, and this gave some very interesting challenges. There was also situations where like developers were using CSV files on Azure file shares, where this stuff should have been in databases long ago, right? So there was a lot of technical education and adoption to be done here. So after a while, I was actually spending most of my time being in meetings with stakeholders, with developer teams and engineers to actually educate them on the platform that we had. We had all of this cool stuff, but people were not using it. One example was that we were having Kubernetes clusters, which of course is built to scale, but we had these big clusters that were running almost completely underutilized, and the applications that were running on there, they were not built for cloud native infrastructure. They were not built to scale. So when you have an application that has batch jobs, for example, then it doesn't make sense to have all of the workers online all the time. This is why Kubernetes is so great, because you can scale out your infrastructure when you need the capacity for running these batch jobs. But when these batch jobs are not running, you have to scale it down. So one of the tasks I did was to implement KEDA, Kubernetes event-driven auto-scaling on these applications, and then implementing that on our Kubernetes clusters. So this was a really cool project to do, to take an application, observing that it was running all the time, and with the developers then implementing auto-scaling and then bringing that live on the clusters. It was a really interesting project. So it was a lot of guidance and teaching people how to do this in this type of role. But there were also less comfortable situations. So for example, this CSV example that I mentioned, like I really had to show how much slower this situation was that they had, where we are reading stuff with Python from CSV files on a file share, and they would have one file share with everything dumped into one file share. Staging, production, they were all taking from the same file share. Like there were some things there that should not be in production. And I really had to educate them on this and make them aware of the security issues, the performance issues that we were having. When you come in as a consultant like that and you just say, yeah, we have to move this to databases, the reaction is, well, hold on here, cowboy. And we don't have these database skills in the team. We don't have the competence. It would take too much time to learn. Yeah, all of it is not that hard when you sit down and just do it, right? This is why soft skills are so important in DevOps, where you actually have to convince stakeholders and managers to free up some time to do this, because there are so many security and performance benefits to these kinds of things. So this role really taught me a very critical thing that most people overlook, which is that DevOps is not just a technical role where you're either SSH-ing and troubleshooting, or you're building these cool projects. Proper DevOps roles, in this case it was a platform engineering role, really requires you to have good soft skills, where you are able to break down complex tasks and communicate those to stakeholders who are not technical. That is an extremely important skill that you need to learn if you want to be a successful DevOps engineer. It's not just about sitting and coding in your room. There is a lot of social interaction that needs to happen as well. That being said, there was a lot of cool technical work that I did there as well. The first thing was that we were running Postgres databases on Kubernetes clusters. So this is where I learned how to deploy and manage and maintain databases on Kubernetes using the Cloud Native PG or the Enterprise DB operators. I had my Postgres experience from my first role that I shared with you, but here I was bringing that to Kubernetes. So that was a extremely interesting area to work with, and I absolutely love doing it. And to this day, I'm using these operators in my home lab and other work assignments as well. But the coolest thing about this job was that we were running Kubernetes clusters on these ships themselves. So we had a massive fleet of ships all over the world connected with the internet over satellite, and on each ship there would be a mini data center essentially, because there's actually a lot of IT that's happening on a ship of that size. And we were also running Kubernetes clusters on those ships. So some of the days would be to wake up, log in, and then which ship am I updating today? And you could actually look it up on the map, and maybe it was like sailing in the South Pacific somewhere, and I would have to then upgrade the Kubernetes cluster on that ship. It was wild. It was wild to think that you would be connecting to a ship sailing somewhere in the ocean and actually talking to the pods on the Kubernetes cluster there. It was really, really cool. And what was interesting was that you actually had to take the time zones into account, because on the ship, when the sailors were off shift, they would all be like watching Netflix or whatever sailors do on ships using internet. You would notice that the connection was very laggy and buggy. So you would have to wait until that was over. And sometimes when you could see on the map, if the ship was sailing southwards, the connection would be really bad. But if it was sailing northwards, it would actually be a much better connection. So you had to take all of these things into account when you were timing your upgrade. It was very interesting to do that kind of work. So that was probably the coolest part of that whole job there, that I upgraded Kubernetes clusters all over the world on ships that were basically everywhere. Really cool. So that's it. That's what a DevOps career can look like. You can be SSH-ing into Linux servers. You can be sweating, doing upgrades at 1 a.m. in the morning, or you can be in heavy discussions with developers who refuse to adopt your platform. It can be very wide. So that's why I wanted to share in depth what these days in the life look like, because I think that not many people actually are able to paint this picture. So I have had many different jobs in many different environments because I've worked as a consultant for many years. And this gave me exposure to many types of environments, which also, which I grew a lot from. This is why I went from nurse to senior DevOps engineer in such a short time, because I worked all day, in the evening, and in the weekends. I never stopped, and because I consciously put myself in these challenging environments. So all of these learnings that I got from these environments, I put them all in the free DevOps Career Blueprint course. If you're interested in landing a DevOps role, you can get this completely for free. It contains over 20 hours of premium video course material. You can find it in the description box below or in the pinned comment. It is completely for free. Check it out, because I'm sure that it will help you. When I was in the beginning, I really struggled with knowing what to do, what to focus on, which tools to learn, and all of these questions are answered in the free DevOps Career Blueprint course that you can get by clicking the link down below. Check it out. Thank you so much for watching this video. Let me know what you think. Does this sound interesting to you? Did this give you a new insight into what a day in the life of a DevOps engineer might look like? And I'll read it in the comments. Let me know. And thank you so much. And I'll see you in the next video.